Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update from Stillwater Critical Minerals. Stillwater is traded on the TSX.V under the ticker PGE and on the OTCQB under the ticker PGEZF. And I'm joined today with the president and CEO of Stillwater Critical Minerals, Mike Rowley. And Mike, always great to get you on the show. We were talking off mic. It's been a while. It's been since last August since we've had you on. So a lot has gone on with the company. I will say that when we were talking last time, we were mentioning that you had some funding from the U.S. Department of Energy to Berkeley Lab, and they were looking at the potential for Stillwater West, your flagship project, to have geological hydrogen production. Well, ever since then, there has been a rampant focus on critical minerals in the U.S., and some questions about what the Trump administration would actually do with regards to it. And I think some people were surprised by what just was launched on March 20th. The Trump administration announced immediate measures to increase American mineral production. And it's basically an initiative and an executive order to focus on critical minerals, to prioritize them, to expedite the permitting process, to help with funding. So just tying in our last conversation to this conversation, what could this mean for your Stillwater West project in Montana? Could there be funds available? Will it help with permitting? What's your outlook after seeing this news from the Trump administration hit last week?
Well, thanks, Chad. Really good to be back. Sorry for the long delay. I was indeed very busy. The whole team was. That executive order exceeded our expectations. We were expecting it. He did mention it was coming. But in its scope, it actually exceeded expectation. There is likely funding there. There is also streamlining of permitting and other requirements and clarifications to the Mining Act, actually, all of which are beneficial. The overarching objective here is to put a priority on American mining and rebuilding the domestic mining industry. And obviously, America has great geology and used to be a world leader in that space. There's no reason this can't be done.
Well, do you think that as far as shining a light on the critical minerals from a national perspective, where a lot of eyeballs are on this order, that moves up something like the Stillwater West project in Montana up the batting order as far as projects that should and could be fast-tracked?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been meeting with government now for 2 years. Their concern, frankly, is obviously a preference for American resources and something that can be in production inside of 10 years, and we're well within that. We have half the Stillwater complex. These are rocks that have been, studied by geologists worldwide, frankly, and the U.S. Geological Survey. But the U.S. government themselves have looked to the Stillwater complex for critical minerals, even back in the 1940s with chrome production under government contract, right? Still the greatest chrome reserves in the U.S. Now, of course, it's Sibanye-Stillwater, our neighbor, producing palladium, platinum, lesser amounts of rhodium, nickel, copper, other things. That's what this district is known for, and the mining history reaches back to the 1880s. What we're doing is basically bringing together all that good past work, and then we brought Glencore in as a shareholder and these ex-Ivanhoe geologists to lead the way with these very large mine models from South Africa that are directly relevant in these rocks in Montana.
Well, let's get into that a little bit more. I've met Danny Grobler in person at the Vancouver Resource Investor Conference, and he was blowing my mind, showing me some of the rock core and telling me the geological theory behind it. I'm not a geologist, but I got enough information from that discussion with Danny to walk away very impressed, Mike. And I think for people listening in, it would help just to point out that this is a polymetallic deposit. So it's hard to talk about it and focus on just one metal because you have the nickel forward part of the deposit, but you got a lot of copper in here. You've got a lot of precious metals in here. You have cobalt. You have the platinum group elements, platinum, palladium, and even rhodium that you've been assaying for. So it's a complex polymetallic deposit, and sometimes it's hard for investors to wrap their head around it. Just for some context, walk them through the resource as it stands now and just how to think of the deposit as it stands before we talk about the exploration on tap.
Sure, that's a really good idea. The resource as of January 2023 is 1.6 billion pounds of nickel, copper, and cobalt, and 3.8 million ounces of palladium, platinum, rhodium, and gold. Plus, not included in that is 2.3 billion pounds of chromium, actually. So this is really world-class stuff. You dig a little deeper, you find out it's actually 5 deposits set across 10 kilometers within 34 kilometers of lower Stillwater complex strike. It really wants to expand. And the parallels in this regard, Ivanhoe's Platte Reef mine, South Africa, 8 billion pounds nickel and copper, plus 95 million ounces of PGEs. And Mahalaquena, producing right next door, is about 50% bigger than that. The numbers are staggering. The scale of these magmatic systems is staggering. And back to our project, we've got 5 deposits that clearly want to connect. And that's the point of this news release, was the results of our modeling of our geophysical survey, a novel type of survey known as a magnetotelluric survey, MMT, a variation basically on an EM electromag survey, really good at detailing, especially through multiple layers, and this is a layered complex. We're basically targeting mid and high grade now within that. So to bring it back to Stillwater, we've got bulk tonnage for days. It's a large and well mineralized system. This has done a really good job of targeting the mid and high grade within that, and that's what we'll be focusing on going forward. To your question, polymetallic, yes, a little bit of a harder sell in the market, but frankly more interesting to a Glencore, and it should be more interesting to investors for the same reason. You're not beholden to any one commodity price. You've got a basket there where 2/3 battery metals, 1/3 PGMs, however you want to slice it, there's value there. That's one of the main things that Glencore saw in us, was that polymetallic blend. We also have grade within scale, and we have scale for days, as I mentioned. So these are very compelling things about it. You bring that back to the fact that there's production right next door, infrastructure already there. There's even a smelter in the district, right? And it becomes a very compelling story going forward.
Well, let's dive into the point you're making about bulk tonnage for days, but there's high grade within that and even some mid grade. You came across some interesting understanding of the geological model over the last 2 years. As following the story with some of the drilling you were doing previous to that, you kind of had one solid model. The Bushveld complex in South Africa was the model, but now you have these N series, these cross-cutting structures, and then some of that's delivered the higher grade, and then there's even some weird things where the sulfides have come down in it that Danny was showing me at the show with the different rock core, that there could be high-grade chunks of sulfide that have come down into the deposit. So I guess there's multiple geological events going on as well as multiple metals. So when you're targeting and you're doing all this, are you looking for those high-grade areas? And talk to us about what this year's drill program will be focused on.
Yeah, this year's drill program will basically be focused on those mid and high-grade zones. We always hit the bulk tonnage anyways as part of doing that. Danny's work and Albie, the other fellow from Ivanhoe, was exactly what you just hit on. It was the structural model. No one has modeled the lower Stillwater complex really ever in detail. And so our model is new, and the USGS is frankly thrilled with it. There's good engagement there. Glencore is impressed with it as well. And the work is ultimately leading us to those targets and the sweeter spots within this system. That's what we'll focus on this coming year. We're targeting something like a 6,000 meter program to start, and you will see us focus on those mid and high grade areas within that.
Well, Mike, I just got to ask you, you've been drilling on this project for a couple of years now, a number of years actually, and you have been expanding the resources. You've put out the resource updates as you outlined, but do you plan on wrapping some economics around this, doing some metallurgical work and just showing the market what could this all be worth?
Absolutely. And that is the imperative for the government here too. I wanted to do that last year, frankly, but markets and pricing were not there. Capital was hard to find. So we did other essential work as well, particularly the model that will drive all this, as done by that geophysical survey. We also did some important work expanding our permits, frankly, as well, that sets the stage for bigger things this year and beyond. A PEA study, yes, as soon as reasonably possible, frankly. Metallurgy, we have really good work by AMAX in the late 60s, early 70s, and they're showing a good con from the CZ Camp Zone deposit in particular. Even using a single-stage flotation back in the day, they're getting rhodium to report, for example, and we look forward to expanding that. I was saying later this year for that, but I think it's now fair to say that's going to be early 2026. But that's certainly a priority, and that's what we have in front of the U.S. government right now, frankly, is a 3-year program to accelerate this. through multiple feasibility studies.
Okay. Well, we're going to be keeping our eyes peeled for when you announce the drill program, but you're saying roughly 6,000 meters. You're going after the high grade and mid grade zones. You'll still hit the bulk tonnage along with that. You're going to be continuing to learn more about the geological model as well as continue to expand the resources. Do you think you'll put out an updated resource estimate then later this year or the beginning of next year, or will you do that in concert with the economic study?
I would look for possibly two updated resource estimates, because we have one that we're working on now from a smaller program, the last drill program. That is currently something we're working on. This year's program, I think, would drive another one as well. And yes, as part of that, the bigger studies that we're going to wrap around it as well.
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot of news on tap for this year. There's also the potential for some good things coming out of these initiatives around critical minerals from the federal government, these executive orders that have been signed. It really puts a spotlight on domestic sources, and you got to look at Montana, and also a lot of eyeballs will immediately float over to your neighbor at Sibanye because they have a smelter, because they have all of these different metals being produced. And as their neighbors and as the ability to show some size and scale in Montana, I think that puts Stillwater Critical Minerals in an interesting light. For those that are listening in, if you want to follow along with the news flow from Stillwater, definitely click on the link below this interview. It takes you right over to the company website, straight to their news section, so you can follow along or sign up for updates. Mike, keep us posted when more news comes out. We'll get you back on for an update. And as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
As always, thank you, Shad.